Well now, lawman. No law here in a long time. They're right, Billy.
Oh, yeah? Been a long time. Easy, boys. I'm not looking for trouble.
That's a mighty big iron for a peaceful man.
I could probably say that there's maybe 2 or 3 movies in the Empire years where I'm probably the worst authority to talk about them because I was not on set. I was in Europe. I was in Rome making movies at Empire Studios right outside of Rome. So Ghost Town shot in Tucson. I never was there, not even for a day. But these were my ideas. I helped, even the movies that were sort of remote, I was very hands-on in casting and obviously development of the script. It all started with the pre-sale, because without that, we wouldn't make a movie. And then post-production, at the time my dad was great and sort of my right arm. So, when you have that experience, which is very fortunate, you kind of know what you're doing, and you also know what to avoid to some degree, and no one can double talk you, which is really good.
See you in hell, lawman. Maybe.
Billy!
Empire, with I think no exceptions, we self-finance movies. We were very lucky at the time to be involved with a weird bank called Credit Lyonnais. So we had a bank line of credit, which, give a bank line of credit to an ambitious young filmmaker. And then suddenly we fell into this deal with Dino De Laurentiis where we literally for 3-4 years owned the ex-Dino De Laurentiis studio. That's a 100-acre studio, 5 sound stages, nothing but buildings. The administration building alone had 100 offices. I think we occupied 5 offices, And of course I was in Dino's old room, which was vast. Dino's room is bigger than our little office here at Raleigh Studios in Los Angeles. So, it's hard to describe exactly how all that felt, but it was a pretty heady experience. Almost every project that I've ever been involved with usually begins with either a title or a piece of art. We're in a world where you have to capture someone quickly. Well, back then it was the video store shelf. They had a choice of many movies, and the hat trick was trying to find a campaign and a piece of art that would give the illusion that someone maybe had missed it theatrically. That was sort of the mother lode. Years later I made a movie called Puppet Master. It was the first Full Moon movie. And to this day, people say, gosh, I missed it in the theaters, but I was so happy to find it on VHS on the video store shelf. It never played one theatrical play date, Puppet Master. So the marketing and the title was super important, and I had friends back in the day, throughout my whole endless career, who had the misfortune of having made sometimes a cool little movie, but they didn't know how to market it. They didn't have a title that was a working title. And more times than not, they would come up with a title and a campaign, and the picture would miss because it didn't have that hook. So, you can't go wrong with Ghost Town. That's really a sort of a classic title, and I think a cool premise. Today everything's been done and redone, so young people today watching these movies for the first time may not be as sort of innocent as many of us were back in the 90s, the 80s, keep going back in time, the 70s, the 60s, because things seen for the first time are very impactful. I was actually, during the entire shoot of Ghost Town in Italy, because that was when we were hot and heavy at the Empire Studios. We were still shooting a few pictures in the States, but actually very, very few. We were in Italy. For a brief moment in time, 3-4 years, we had the ex-Dino De Laurentiis studios. We were shooting movies like Crawl Space and Robot Jocks and From Beyond and Troll. And so there was so much magic over there and a lot to manage, because sometimes we would shoot 2 or 3 movies at the same time. And for me, it was just like, I couldn't even believe it. All these big sound stages, and here we were making these films. So I was involved in pre-production. It was my concept. Had a lot of wonderful people, assigned to that production. Mac Ahlberg. Mac did my first 3D movie called Parasite. That was the first picture he made here in the U.S. He's a Swedish DP. And I think he gave it a great look. And then other actors, Jimmy Skaggs, people we were involved with, I was involved with prior movies. So it kind of went on remote in a way because I was on the other side of the planet. And those were amazing days. And there was actually a time that I think that year or the year before where we were shooting, it wasn't Ghost Town, we were shooting another picture in the States. We were shooting 2 movies at the studio, and we were shooting Eliminators in Spain. So, I mean, that seems crazy back in the day, especially considering these are all 35mm shoots, heavy lifting, negative, big lights. This wasn't today, the little camera and 3 lights and 5 guys and you're off and running. These shows were, you know, I mean, relatively speaking, big productions.
Oh, shit.
What is it?
I just found what's left of the priest.
The script, like all these scripts, do change. Usually what happens is we start off with a very ambitious idea, and as the practical side of things creep in, you snip this, you cut that, and you do what you can, and you have to do that also to make a better movie. You know, I've worked with many first-time directors, some very successfully, like Stuart Gordon, and others maybe not so successfully. And you know, with experience, you become agile and you know how to move, and maybe you don't do that. Maybe you don't move the camera that way. And you know, when you don't have the experience, you're looking at a storyboard, it has to happen, and you know, you have to be able to be flexible, and especially as budgets get smaller and smaller. So, you know, I think in a lot of ways, the Empire movies and later on Full Moon movies, many of them are big ideas. They're ideas that could be, maybe should have been $100 million tentpole movies, but we have a small budget. Then you kind of figure out how to make it, you know, and make it within a price range. But a lot of these ideas, we write what we hope is a realistic script. It turns out it's not that realistic. Then there's a rewrite, gets a little smaller, and then in the hands of a good director, a seasoned director on set, you find ways to accomplish what needs to be accomplished without, you know, breaking the budget.
Jesus! What was in there?
Leftovers.
Most of the Empire films had at least a limited theatrical release. And so Empire, aside from making movies on 35 and shooting them primarily in Italy, sometimes in Spain, and in the States, of course, we also released these films in anywhere from 10 to 1,000 theaters. We were in the theatrical distribution business. We had 3 regional offices. We were, through all the obvious services, moving prints all over the country. And we only had a few movies where we actually released 1,000 prints. Now keep in mind that 1,000 prints in the day was about $1.2 million just to buy the prints. And we spent a reasonable amount of marketing dollars, you know, for the ads and for TV and all that stuff. So some of these movies we had a $2.5, $3.5 million expenditure just to release them. Now the business back then was still, you know, reasonably predictable for small companies who would release an exploitation movie. You wouldn't get killed, but the odds of making money were really slim. The reason why we did this is because back in the day we had these print and ad commitments to the big video companies. So we were primarily distributed by Vestron Video at the time. So the deal went something like, we'll give you a $2 million advance for, name a movie, Ghoulies, but you need to spend $2 million in prints and ads and give it that exposure theatrically, which we did because we figured most of that would be recovered, and it usually was. With one exception, which is Ghoulies. None of the movies that we released theatrically from the early days of Empire to 1989 ever made a penny. They all lost different degrees of money. You know, making money theatrically, now today, of course, today it's a forbidden world. You got to be a major studio, you have to have these crazy movies, you have to have $50 million to open a movie. I mean, it's an independent can't do this. But we were close behind Roger Corman, who was doing this very successfully in the 50s and 60s and 70s, you know. But then everyone ran away because that business didn't work. So I remember Ghost Town being a small theatrical release, and then it went to video.
You can't kill me.
It's a satanic showdown, Ghost Town.
It's funny how, regarding the reception of the acceptance of Ghost Town and all these Empire films, the only Empire film that had just raves, people were writing us letters, and was Reanimator. That was the only film that was, you know, incredibly well received. Many critics gave it the top, put it in their top 10 of that year, and that's against every major movie from every major studio. But that was the exception. Otherwise, you know, we were pretty. People were kind of kind sometimes to the movies we made, but These were really, with few exceptions, just well-made, well-appointed direct-to-video movies. They weren't really theatrical films. We had to release them theatrically for reasons I just described, but they were never intended to live and breathe on the big screen. So as a result of that, the reviews were sort of lukewarm, generally speaking. However, because the movies were rather unique, as are many of the Full Moon movies, they've really stood the test of time. I mean, here we are in 2017, talking about a movie I made in '87 or '88 for a German release, on Blu-ray. I mean, movies that don't have that sort of longevity, don't have something still left to entertain beyond just blood and guts and stupidity. They're all sitting in a vault somewhere. So these movies have traveled well because my movies are more benign. They're not. I never made a slasher movie. For me, there's no fun seeing a knife cutting a woman up. It's or heads being chopped off. All you have to do is turn the TV on, and that's what's going on in the real world. So my idea was always to entertain with fantasy creatures, puppets, dolls, situations that are kind of fantastical, and I think those movies have really passed through the test of time.